Welcome to Serendipity Intended. My name is JJJan, and I am so glad that you are here. It is time for another day in Junk Journal January. Today is day 13, Paper Trail. And I thought it would be kind of fun to make a paper trail of the papers that I have been using over the last month or so in my journaling and create something that honestly I've always wanted to do and never done, which is make a masterboard. So as you can see, I have a ridiculous amount of paper scraps, which I am going to pull from in order to make a masterboard. And then I'll use that masterboard to in turn create a page in my journal for the day and have a little paper trail of sorts. So I started by just grabbing papers that I thought color-wise worked well together and were representative of some of the work that I've done over the last several weeks, ignoring the ones that felt a little too Christmassy, since much of my journaling in the past 30 days or so has been very much related to Christmas. Now, ordinarily, I would use a matte gel medium or something like that to create a masterboard because it's a little easier to apply to a surface and then just sort of stick things down. But I didn't want to wait for the drying time, and I wasn't sure how long it was going to take to dry after I layered paper upon paper upon paper. So I just used my trusty glue stick. Now, one thing that I started out doing and then ended up moving away from, and I'll try and remember for next time, is I started out using larger pieces, like you can see here, and then I switched over probably quicker than I should to using small pieces. I think mostly because I got distracted by some of the smaller bits that I pulled out and because I didn't pull up enough big pieces. And I ended up having to do a lot more filling in than I had originally intended. One thing I found that was a bit surprising about creating this masterboard was how meditative it was. I was afraid that I would get bored just gluing things down one after the other, or that I would end up getting too hung up in trying to find the first perfect placement. But instead, what I found was that I just sort of set a pace. I actually put some music on and I tried to put things down in tempo with the music that I was listening to. And that kind of helped me not to overthink things and just put pages down. One conscious decision that I made as I was working on this masterboard was that I wanted to be sure that I was having torn edges as much as possible as opposed to straight edges. Just because as I was gluing things down, I realized that the straight edges really bothered me and the torn edges just visually made more sense to my brain. I don't think that that's something that you have to do. It's just something that I found I wanted to do for myself. Now, this piece was interesting. It's actually a piece of collage paper that I think I purchased from 49 Dragonflies. And I set it aside for a moment, but then I grabbed it again. And I ended up tearing out around the image of the lace that was on the paper and it gave the effect of collaging on a piece of actual lace, but without the bulk. I was super glad that I had this page in my stash, or this piece in my stash, and also that I included it on my masterboard. I really love the torn edges and the way that that looks, particularly for that piece. As you can see, I decided to use the rest of the paper from that bit of lace collage paper on my page. One, because I really liked it and I thought the papers were interesting, but also because I wanted to put those pages around to kind of connect the pieces. I did find that I kept thinking about this masterboard as a page in and of itself, rather than something that I was creating to cut apart and use for different things. I don't know whether that's a plus or a minus, just something that I noticed. That particular piece that I just glued down had a bit of the glue from the spine left on the one edge of the page. I thought it was interesting, so I glued it down with that bit still attached. Now this particular piece was rather thick. I printed it on a heavier, more of a cardstock page than just a regular piece of copy paper. So we'll see how that goes in terms of when I cut this up into smaller bits and pieces. Just had that little bit of white left at the end, and I had this tissue paper with some ink on it, and I really wanted to use that, so it sort of filled in that last little bit of white space pretty nicely. I liked the way it looked, in fact, so much that I had a little bit more of the tissue paper, and I decided to add that to some other parts of my masterboard as well. You can't go wrong with a bit of texture, and tissue paper is great because it adds that texture visually and also by touch, but doesn't add a tremendous amount of bulk. So with the papers down, I decided to then go back over with a stencil and add another layer to the masterboard. So using some black walnut Ranger ink and just stenciling in areas where maybe the paper was a little bit plainer, a little bit less interesting, and also just to connect some of the pieces together. And sort of like that. And then this is one of my favorite stamps, this word stamp. I'm going to just use black archival ink, and I'm not even going to bother putting this stamp onto a block. I'm just going to stamp it as is. And again, just trying to move it around the page to add some additional layers. think generally the idea behind a masterboard is to create a background that then you can use for other things. And so, again, just filling in some spaces, spreading that around. I wanted to add a little bit more organic of a stamp as well, and so I got this floral, which is another one of my favorites. It's a little bit larger, and again using that black archival ink. And I did choose to use the archival ink here because I don't know what I'm going to be doing with this masterboard, and I wanted to be able to put something wet on top of it and not have it smear. And then I decided to come back with a few focal point images and just glue them on as well, on kind of on the very top, just as one additional layer. Satisfied with how that turned out, and just trim off some of the bits that were hanging over the edge. And that completes my masterboard. So I needed to figure out how much of a piece from my masterboard I needed to cut, and I decided I needed about 4.5 inches across and then 5 inches vertically to fill it in. And I started to cut it from the front, and then I remembered that people in videos that I've watched suggest cutting it from the back. I guess so you're just sort of letting it happen. And so I decided to do the same thing. Checking on my ruler to make sure I got 5 inches. And I accidentally, that piece that I thought might give me a problem did in fact come unglued. So I just snipped it off, and this time I grabbed some art glitter glue. Since it was such a small piece and it's kind of thick, I wanted to make sure that it stayed adhered. So I still have some masterboard pieces that I can use for other projects, but I have a piece to use for this particular journal. And I think that since this piece ended up with that white flower, or the flower on the white background, I'm gonna just use that as my focal point and not worry about adding anything else, particularly because this page in and of itself does have quite a bit of bulk. Definitely wanted it to stay stuck and did not want to use any kind of wet glue, just because the Hobonichi paper doesn't respond super well. It gets a little wrinkly. So I use my tape runner, which is a much drier adhesive, and it'll hold that pretty firmly. Now, I did decide that I was not a fan of the extra white space. I cut it a little smaller than I probably should have, but that was nothing that a little bit of washi couldn't cure. I did want to make that flower stand out and pop a little bit, so I decided to create a super rough border with a paint pen, and then decided that it was really the wrong shade of green, so I went back over it with a distress crayon, and that made the green make a little more sense with what was going on in the background. And then I grabbed an antique linen distress crayon and just added a few more marks to bring out some of the yellow from the background. And then I had this sticker and a little bit of playing, trying to figure out where I wanted to put that. And a quick brush with some vintage paper distress ink around the edges just to help it pop off the page a tiny bit. And I've been finding that this particular set of stickers doesn't stay stuck super well, so added a little bit of glue to the back just to help it stay adhered. I also decided that the top edge needed a little bit. I really wanted to leave the part at the top open for just a tiny bit of journaling. And if I need to spill over onto the background page, that's okay. But I'm glad I added the washi at the top there. And then just super quickly coloring in the number 13 and the block around it, which is something that I have been trying to do in all of my pages. And that is it. Paper trails. I'm satisfied with results. I hope you liked it, and I hope you make a great day.